Hi ladies, this is Janissa and the Sacha
Hey.
of the Papyrus Book Club. Welcome to our review of Toni Morrison's God Help the Child. So we hope that you've read the book and that you enjoyed it. This was quite an enjoyable read. It also brought to light many issues that have significance universally, but specifically to the Black community, such as colorism. We did find, though, that even though the book did touch on these very poignant issues, that it didn't delve as deeply as we would have expected from a Toni Morrison book. But that is not to say that it wasn't great writing. It still was great writing. And so we just want to go over some of the main themes, the main characters, and the story of God Help the Child.
So, God Help the Child was, just to give you a brief synopsis, the main character was a woman named Bride. And she was the daughter of a light-complected Black woman who was extremely dismissive and removed from her daughter because Bride was very dark-complected. And it was such a surprise for the mother because her and her husband were both light complected. So it was seriously like a genetic throwback. Like that was the ancestors like, oh, okay,
right.
you trying to pass or you trying to, do this? Here you go. So, so Bride was born, she was born Lula Ann, very dark complected with straight hair. So because of that, her mother kind of ostracized her and just basically provided for her basic needs, but didn't give her a mother's love. We start the book with Bride having since reinvented herself. She is a successful businesswoman. She is a widely sought after lover. People think that she's completely beautiful. And her uniform, in a sense, is a very sleek, minimal makeup, very sleek look, minimal makeup, minimal jewelry, and all white. Now, that was one of Toni Morrison's many uses of symbolism in the book. And Janissa and I and, several of the Papyrus women have had like varying ideas as to what that white symbolized. Of course, white, the most obvious, is the most obvious symbol of purity, coupled with her name being Bride, that virginal, new, fresh. So that's the most obvious take on it, especially since Bride has completely reinvented herself and kind of separated herself from her past and reinvented herself as a new woman. I kind of took from it that the white we learned was suggested to her by a male stylist who said that, this is the best way to accentuate her beauty. I felt that the white, she was in a sense kind of hiding behind the white. She was using it as a way to essentially kind of cloak or neutralize her darkness. Because, in a society where darkness and full African features are seen as an affront to a society dictated by European beauty standards, wearing white, not wearing bold lipsticks, not wearing bright colors to, make it even more vivid. Like, yes, I have beautiful dark skin and I'm wearing red lipstick. What? You know what I mean? is in a sense kind of appeasing, society. So I kind of felt that was why Bride was, it was safe. The white was safe for her. And of course it can symbolize renewal, but at the point where we start the book, Bride has not renewed herself in a sense. Right. So, because of her history with her mother, Bride's relationships with herself and the other characters in the book are strongly affected. And one of the main ways that is that it seemed that she seemed to never go beyond a certain surface depth.
Yeah.
With all of her relationships, with her frenemy Brooklyn, with her lover Booker, so on and so forth. So did you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so definitely her relationship with her mother significantly shaped her relationship with other women and people in general. I think maybe her not receiving that intimate, very vital motherly love, motherly affection affects her, and the fact that her mother was so cold towards her, like not just was her mother, you can say, well, someone's mother, not everyone's parents is, very the kissy, huggy type, the lovey-dovey type, the affectionate type, but her mother said very scathing things about her, like very, even as she was a baby, and her mother even considered killing her at one point.
Wow.
So it really is a miracle that she wasn't more injured in some, you can say. I think that she came out of that experience, of such a traumatic childhood, not crazy.
Right, seriously.
Or that she didn't kill herself.
Yeah.
Really and truly, because the things that she experienced as a child were very traumatizing, So you can see how that background influences her relationship with women and other people. And I suppose maybe her keeping things at a surface level was her way of her defense mechanism, because as a result of her not receiving or her having that type of relationship with her mother, maybe subconsciously she was afraid to delve more deeply into other relationships because she was afraid of, maybe she didn't feel trust, towards people after having experienced, such a jading, experience or relationship with her mother. So
and it's so interesting too, just hearing you speak on it, because I can recall points in the book where she was at her weakness, where you could see that she was almost needy, and she almost became childlike when she was attacked by the teacher, and when she was dealing with Brooklyn, like she couldn't even make decisions, like she had reverted back to that kind of childlike state. And then when her lover Booker left her, she was so intent on finding out why, like she dropped everything to go towards him, which was so interesting because they didn't have that deep of a relationship. It was essentially sexual and companionship, but they didn't know anything about each other. So which leads us to her journey and Booker, the character of Booker.
I think that her relationship with Booker was a catalyst for her renewal, and like her really beginning to explore herself or delve into like self-exploration, and her, interestingly enough, her seeking to learn more about Booker and his past and who he was, and the reasons why he broke up with her, launched her into discovering who she was, and they kind of rediscover themselves together. They rediscover themselves together, and something that was a little bit that stood out to me a bit was Booker. There was a point in the story when Bride mentioned that Booker would never call her by name, by the name that she gave herself, and that was kind of interesting to me because I wondered, I was like, okay, is it that he wants to see her as more than this person she has invented? Like, is his denial of this name that she has given for herself, is that a result of his wanting to know more about her, his wanting to go beyond what I guess was apparent to him to be a friend, a facade. So Bride starts to look into Booker's past. She goes to the town. She retraces steps to find him, and through that process, she realizes that Booker himself, he has experienced a very traumatic childhood. His older brother was sexually molested and murdered, and he has carried around that cross. He has carried that tragedy with him throughout his life, and he has been grieving his brother's death throughout his life, and that in itself has shaped his relationship with others, and interestingly enough, their breaking up was a result of Booker being angry at what he perceived as Bride's forgiving a child molester, or wanting to make peace with this child molester, and him not being able to reconcile that perception with the experience that his brother went through, that tragedy.
I want to talk a little bit about Booker and what we perceive of him as a black man initially. From what we hear of just Bride's kind of recounting of their relationship in Brooklyn, her kind of take on it, someone could quickly make a snap judgment and make Booker into the stereotype of the lazy, not uneducated, because she said that he always had a book, but just like the lazy black man who's living off, his girl, and, because we don't know much about him. And Brooklyn recounts a time where she saw him like hanging out in front of the library with like some homeless guys or something like that. So, we're thinking that he's with this successful woman, and then he just ups and leaves her, and it's like, what? How dare he? But as we follow the story, we learn that, Booker, although he came from kind of meager beginnings, he was from a very emotionally rich family, and he was extremely educated. He was a poet, he was a musician, so he had chosen to renounce a lot of kind of society's trappings and stuff, partly because of his sorrow, from the death of his brother, and partly because it became so shallow to him. I think he came upon the realization in college when, his frat brothers or college roommates or whatever, like the whole, like, I don't know, just the conversation started to ring hollow to him. What people deem as important, what people deem as worthy of, building relationships upon, it seemed to have no depth to him. So he kind of detached himself from society, detached himself from his family, and he kind of went through life as this loner. He was really in his head, and it was only through like his writings and his conversations with his aunt that were recounted to Bride, that Bride started to find out more about who he was as a person and how he thought. But along Bride's journey, more I don't want to say more importantly, but since she is the central character, we see that she starts to revert back to, or regress back to, a child, essentially. She starts to lose pubic hair, she starts to lose her breasts, and it's very distressing to her, obviously. Yeah. But other people seem not to notice. So here is another tool of symbolism that Toni Morrison uses to kind of show, what happens when you go through the process of self-discovery. You're taken back to that age of trauma because you've never fully healed past that point, beyond that point. she had created this kind of character, bride, so easy, easy with, relationships. She can get any guy she wants. She can, create this brand with her company and stuff like that. But inside, she had never truly dealt with, all the things that she had experienced. Falsely accusing, someone to get love. Falsely accusing someone of sexual abuse to get love from her mother. Seeing, her landlord perpetrate, like, rape against, like, a young boy, and hearing her mother, like, so easily dismiss it, and I feel like that kind of laid the foundation for her, because her mother used the excuse of survivalism a lot. She was cruel to Bride because, she had to learn how to survive in a society that didn't appreciate dark skin. She turned a blind eye to the little boy getting raped because she wouldn't be able to find another apartment. They would kick them out. The landlord would kick them out, and they wouldn't be able to find an apartment as nice as that, or
right,
to suit their needs. So,
and her. It's funny how what's the seeds you plant in children, how they come to bear fruit. And Bride, she becomes in several regards, she becomes very adept at surviving. And some would say at thriving. But it raises the question: at what price? Like, what price are we willing to pay for so-called survival? If you aren't at peace with yourself, this may probably sound a bit preachy, but to me, it's like that was a very resonant message from the story. Like, you can have all these trappings of wealth and success, but if you aren't happy with yourself, if you're not living in peace, and on the surface, Bride looked successful and she looked happy, but evidently she wasn't. Evidently she was still going through the trauma, still facing the trauma of these experiences,
And one little crack can bring that whole thing crumbling down.
Exactly. Fortunately for her and, for Booker, they were able to, she was able to go back, and address those things and heal from them. And another speaking of which, another symbol that was employed in the story was fire. So Booker's aunt, I don't remember her name. What was her name? Queen. And all these names, very, very interestingly given names. But so Booker's aunt, Queen, she was a woman, who herself was dealing with trauma and tragedy. She had children with various men, and she had very strained relationships at best with her children and with her children's father. And she herself was grieving, I guess, mistakes that she made and how things played out in her past. So, but Booker still had a relationship with his aunt, and that probably was the one person in his family that he maintained close ties with. So through Queen, Bride comes to know a lot about Booker, and essentially she served as a glue that bound them together, and she ends up dying in the story, and she dies as a result of a fire. And to me, that fire symbolized, once again, kind of similar to the white, but as is typical of the case with fire, you think of rebirth, you think of cleansing. It's a different type of cleansing from water, rain, which is another character in the book. But you have this other phase of cleansing, and you have almost phoenix rising from the flames. And we see at the end of the book, Booker and Bride learn that they're going to have a child. So, and it happens pretty much at the same time, or right at the point of Queen passing away as a result of this fire. So you have one life, one life being exchanged for another, So, want to speak?
And then if you think about the potentiality of Queen being reborn, you know, a lot of times they say when an elder passes,
exactly,
and a little one is born, it's like the energy of that elder passes through to that child. And it made me think that with Bride's kind of transformation through her journey and her reconnection with Booker, and Booker's strong sense of self, and I felt like with that child, they would raise that child to be with the attributes of a queen,
right?
You know, essentially. So I want to talk a little bit about the Rain. Janessa mentioned Rain being a character, a physical character, and also a literary kind of symbolic character in the book. Rain was used a lot throughout the book, and again, it ties to, I mean, if you think about trauma, you know, essentially the book is about people healing and renewing themselves from experiences of trauma. And then it's also about how we are shaped, you know, from childhood trauma, you know, specifically. If we think about like the ages of which the characters kind of experience trauma, they were at, you know, typical ages of like rites of passage, 7, 8, you know, and that was symbolic in the sense that, you know, a rite of passage transitions you into who you are as an adult. And of course, there are several stages or several rites throughout your lifespan, but I think, you know, Rain was used over and over. Rain, Bride crashed her car because she was in the middle. She was driving in the rain. Rain was a child that she encountered after she crashed. The child's adoptive father found her, and she was introduced to Rain, who was a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of her mother as well, and who Bride was able to connect to, who Rain was able to connect to. And it was funny because Rain was, we didn't know her age.
Right.
But she was adopted by 2 kind of hippie parents who, they didn't have any electronics in their house. They washed their clothes by hand, you know, very basic, minimal living. And to Bride, it was like a shock. She was just not used to that. She was used to the finer things in life, and she didn't know why these, you know, crazy white people were living the way that they were living. And they had made it a point to say that they were, I think they were lawyers, or one of them was a lawyer or whatever. They had like the things that define success in America, but they chose this lifestyle. And I think it was a way for Bride to kind of go back to basics, to square one. It was a way for Bride to get back to kind of square one. This was a point in the book where she was nurtured, you know, she was taken care of. The woman was, you know, helping her to bathe. You know, she was fed nourishment, and she was able to connect with a child who actually, you know, just recently gone through such a traumatic experience. And Bride had put on so much. You know, she had acquired so much to hide behind, you know, or to hide the little girl who had, you know, been hurt. And this was kind of a stripping or paring down of all of that, to kind of take her to take her to basics so that she can kind of evolve, you know, beyond that space, you know?
So those were, you know, we can discuss these things more in depth, all day. But pretty much that was the gist of the book. And those are the things that stood out to us the most. So feel free to leave your comments and let us know what you thought of the book at the bottom of this video. And please follow us on Instagram, Papyrus Book Club. And do subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you will be able to view all other reviews in the future.
And if you are interested in participating in the book club and you are in Atlanta, please email papyrusbookclub@gmail.com. If you are not in Atlanta and you're interested in starting your own chapter wherever you are, again, email us at papyrusbookclub.com so we can send you the details. And we look forward to building with you. We look forward to growing with you, discussing, and just enjoying good literature. So until next time.
Yay.
Peace.
Peace.